Ruth from Alienation to Monarchy. I will pass it on to Dr. Ziegler. Thank you so much. And I shared the source sheets. It was also sent out in the email, but also in the chat for those that don't have it. And I'm sure Dr. Ziegler will share it on the screen as well.
Yeah, I'm going to share it right now. There we go. Okay. Okay, so first of all, Erev Tov, or really, I guess, for a lot of you, Tzoraim Tovim. Thank you, Esti, for that, for sharing your father's bracha. That's a beautiful bracha, so it's a good way to go into Shavuot. I want to talk a little bit about Megillat Ruth, and I want to just really begin with the first pasuk of Megillat Ruth, which places Megillat Ruth in its historical and biblical context. We are told at the beginning of Megillat Ruth, "Vahi b'mei Shvot HaShoftim." It was in the days that the judges were judging, which immediately raises the most obvious question, which is, if this book takes place during the period of Shoftim, why doesn't the book appear in Sefer Shoftim? Especially since we know that Sefer Shoftim is made up of independent narratives, and of course we could simply slip in Megillat Ruth between any of the two stories of the Shoftim. We could put her in, put the story in between Devorah and Gideon, or between Yiftach and Shimshon, and it wouldn't interrupt the narrative at all. And why does it get its own book, right? And this question is really compounded by the Gemara in Bava Batra, which tells us what our tradition is with regard to the authors of the different books of Tanakh. Of course, the books of Tanakh don't come with title pages, so we have this tradition of who authored the different books. And we're told in Bava Batra on Daf Yudalad Amud Bet, Shmuel katav sifro v'shoftim v'Ruth. So Shmuel wrote his own book. He wrote Sefer Shmuel, and he wrote Shoftim, and he wrote Ruth, which only compounds the question, if Shmuel wrote both of these books, why did he write them as separate and distinct books? Why didn't he just put them together? We're somewhat sparing with our biblical books. There are only 24 of them. So the idea of Ruth becoming an independent book, a book of its own, really does raise a question. Why wouldn't we just put this book into Sefer Shoftim? And yet I think anyone who's ever encountered Megillat Ruth and Sefer Shoftim feels that the answer to this question is rather simple, it's rather obvious, right? These two books are so different. They progress along such different trajectories. They really take drastically different directions, and they present for us entirely different kinds of societies. I'm going to say it's even more than that, right? You see, I'll just maybe expand on that for a little bit. Shoftim is a book of struggle, a book of disorder, a book of problematic societal interactions. It's filled with wars, and it ends with a terrible civil war, which really leaves the nation on the cusp of imminent destruction. Right? You sense that at the end of Sefer Shoftim, Am Yisrael is really on it's really on the verge of doom. It's on the verge of annihilation. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. But Megillat Ruth has a completely different tone. It's a tranquil book. It's a pastoral book. It has wheat fields waving in the background, right? It's a story of harmony. It's a story of positive societal interactions, certainly between the two protagonists, right, between Boaz and Ruth, and also Naomi. And it ends with a promise of continuity. It ends with 10 generations. It ends with a continuous dynasty. It's really very, very different. I mean, Megillat Ruth is a book of chesed, and the word chesed appears only twice in the entire 21 chapters of the book of Shoftim. Once in the negative, lo asu chesed, and once in a military context. Sefer Shoftim is not a book of chesed, and Megillat Ruth is a book of chesed. And, I would say that when Shmuel writes these books, he's actually writing them not just as contrasting books, but as books that are really in dialogue with each other. Right? If you look, for example, at the final pasuk of the book of Judges, which is really just a disastrous ending, we're told by Yamim Hahem, Ein Melech b'Yisrael, Ish Hayashar Be'einav Yaseh. In those days, there's no king in Israel. Everyone does whatever he wants, and of course, what he wants is extremely chaotic. Right? There's just utter chaos that reigns at the end of Sefer Shoftim. There's no king, there's no leader, there's no shofet, and there's no morality. there's no justice, there's no avodat Hashem, there's no society to speak of. As I said, we end with a civil war. A civil war is an indication of a failed society, a society that is imploding. That's the end of the book of Judges. But look at how Shmuel concludes the book of Ruth. V'yishai holid et David. Yishai gave birth to David. In other words, Yesh melech b'Yisrael. In fact, I would even suggest here that the book of Ruth is not just a contrast to the book of Judges. It's much more direct than that. It is a solution for the book of Judges. The book of Judges ends with leaderlessness, with no king, and therefore everything has erupted into utter chaos. And the book of Ruth ends with the birth of the king, with the birth of not just David, but the Davidic dynasty. Shmuel seems to be creating a dialogue between these books in which Ruth is the solution for Sefer Shoftim. Now, I'll say a couple more things. I'm not going to be able to get into it in great detail, but I will mention that I think Shmuel is in a very is creating a very extensive dialogue between the book of Ruth and especially the end of Sefer Shoftim, so that Sefer Shoftim ends with this civil war. But the civil war, of course, is brought about because of the terrible story of the concubine in Givah, which is a Sodom and Amorah-like story. This concubine is traveling with her husband. They arrive in Givah. No one gathers them into their home to give them lodgings until there's this non-local Ephraimite man who offers them lodgings. But sure enough, as they're sitting and eating dinner, the people of the town of Giv'ah surround the house and demand to rape the guest. Refusing to throw out the guest, the husband throws out his concubine instead. It is a horrific story, and that's what precipitates the civil war. Now, this civil war is between the tribe of Binyamin, which throws its support behind the people of Giv'ah, who are Benjamites and who have engaged in this horrific act of the collective rape of the concubine. And so the civil war is against the tribe of Binyamin. Now, during the course of this war, the people who are warring with Binyamin and destroying Binyamin also take an oath that they will not marry their daughters to anybody from the tribe of Binyamin. And the oath is framed as a curse. In fact, one of the final verses of the book of Judges issues a curse on anybody who marries his daughter to the tribe of Binyamin. Arur notein isha leBinyamin. Cursed be the person who gives his daughter to Binyamin. So we have a cursed society. We have a society that throws a woman out of the house. The house no longer functions to protect the woman, to protect the vulnerable members of society. And by the time we find ourselves in this situation, and suddenly at the end of Sefer Shoftim, it becomes clear to the nation that the Benjamites are headed for oblivion. Nobody will marry them, and they've been virtually wiped out. And so they scramble to find a solution, and they scramble to find marriage for these Benjamites, and they come up with terrible solutions. Right? One of their solutions, I won't tell you all the solutions, but one of their solutions is, let's go to the city of Yavesh Gilad, because the city of Yavesh Gilad, we're quite angry with them. They did not come to war with Binyamin. They didn't join in the civil war. But that also means they didn't take the oath that their daughters can't marry Benjamites. So we can kill two birds with one stone, right? Operative word being kill, and we'll go and we'll wipe out the people of Yavesh Gilad, except for the young unmarried women, and they can marry the Benjamites. Right? You see why this is just a horrific solution. This is a marriage which is conceived in violence. So we have a society which is a cursed society, a society which is a violent society. Now, if you look at the book of Ruth, I think the book of Ruth is being presented here as the direct contrast of everything that we just saw. Right? The book of Ruth is a book of blessings. It's filled with blessing. Bruchat LaHashem, Baruch Hu LaHashem, Yivarech Hashem, Yehi Makirech Baruch. The word bracha is a prominent word in the book of Ruth. And of course, the book of Ruth it concludes with marriage, which is conceived with respect. right? It's not a marriage which is conceived in violence. And of course, at the very end of Megillat Ruth, when Boaz is about to marry Ruth, he receives a bracha from the people, which begins with the words, Yitein Hashem et ha'isha haba'a el beitecha, right? God shall make this woman who is coming into your house. I won't go on with the bracha, but what is the idea? The idea is that at the end of the book of Judges, they're throwing women out of house. They're throwing the women out of the houses, and the house is going to collapse because it is a house which no longer functions to protect its members. Whereas at the end of the book of Ruth, it's about building a house by bringing a woman into the home. There's so many aspects of these contrasting portraits that Shmuel creates when he sets up Megillat Ruth as the solution to Sefer Shoftim. Now, the real question that I want to ask today is how? How does this work, right? We have this, terrible period of Shoftim, which I'll expand upon in a moment, and then we have Megillat Ruth, which, is meant to provide a solution. It's only 4 chapters long. How does it get us to that solution? To put it more simply, Megillat Ruth begins with the words Vayi b'nei Shvot HaShoftim, and it ends with the word David. How do we go from the terrible period of the Judges to the period of David? That's really the question. How does Megillat Ruth move us there? So to begin with, I want to say a couple things about Sefer Shoftim. I want to begin by saying, many of us, when we learn Sefer Shoftim in school, we learn about the religious cycle, right, how Sefer Shoftim unravels because of the idolatry that they keep coming back to. And I want to put that aside from them. That certainly is one aspect of Sefer Shoftim. I want to talk about another major problem in the book of Judges, which is of a social nature. The nation is breaking up into tribal units, and the nation is no longer exhibiting loyalty or commitment one to the other. They are not regarding each other as members of the same nation. We see many different examples of this, but perhaps more egregiously, that kind of disloyal behavior, the lack of commitment that we see between the different tribes, we also see it between individuals. They have created a society which is not a society of chesed. In fact, they have left the path of Abraham. There's no chesed. When there's no chesed, that means they're not fulfilling the vision of Abraham. They are not creating a nation based on chesed. There's no loyalty in the book of Judges. We see it at the very, very beginning. We see it in the story of Devorah. When Devorah, the Shofetet, turns to Barak ben Avinoam in chapter 4, at the very beginning of the book, and she says to him, I command you in the name of God to come and fight, and I promise you victory. In the name of God, she commands him. And Barak says, well, kind of hems and haws, in talchini v'alachti, v'im lo talchini lo elech. If you go with me, I'll go, but if you don't go with me, I won't go. I make the conditions. This is the epitome of conditional loyalty. And of course, in Shirat Devorah, in the song that Devorah sings to commemorate the victory in the war, she chastises quite openly those tribes that refuse to join the war. That means already in the beginning of the book of Shoftim, there are tribes that refuse to join the national effort to fight their national enemies. There is not a lot of loyalty going on in the book of Judges, and one of the chilling ways I think that this finds expression is in the fact that people aren't giving food to each other. I think that the one of the most striking examples of this is in the period of Gideon. Gideon is fighting Midian, Amalek, and Bnei Kedem, the nomadic tribes, and at some point during the course of the war, Zebach and Salmunah, 2 of the Midianite kings, make their way across the Jordan River. And Gideon takes his troops to chase after them, to pursue them. And the troops become extremely hungry, very exhausted, and Gideon turns to the 2 neighboring Jewish towns, Sukkot and Penuel, and he asks for food for his troops. And they say to him, Hachaf Zebach v'Talmunah biyadecha? Or are the kings in your hands? We should give your troops food? I mean, I think it's an extraordinary moment. I mean, extraordinary in the most horrible sense. It's a chilling moment. The idea of refusing soldiers who are fighting on your behalf, refusing to give them food, and of course they don't say we don't have food. They say, no, we don't feel like giving you food. You didn't win such a great victory. The idea of not giving these soldiers food is astounding. I would say even a step further, the idea of not giving anybody food is astounding. Somebody comes knocking on your door and they ask for food, whether they're a soldier or whether they're from your nation, or even if they're not from your nation. I think the most basic the most basic components of human decency would require the person to give them food. To me, that seems very obvious, especially when we're talking about a nation that is founded in the values of Abraham, the values of hachnasat orchim, of taking in guests and of doing chesed. They have abandoned Abraham's path. They don't give food. They don't give loyalty. They are not committed one to the other. And of course, this spirals into a situation of outright cruelty, which is, of course, the story of the concubine in Giv'ah, who also sits with her husband in the streets of Giv'ah because nobody wants to give them food. Finally, when this Ephraimite man agrees to take them in, he only agrees to take them in after they say, don't worry, we have plenty of food. You don't have to feed us, and you don't have to feed your animals. This assumption that people are not giving each other food during the period of the judges, that is a portrait of society which is so deeply troubling. Now, one of the things I think that we're meant to understand about the society at the end of Judges emerges from a particularly striking phenomenon in these last 5 chapters of the book. These are the 5 chapters that describe the absence of kingship, the absence of leadership, the absence of a shofet in these final 5 chapters of the book of Judges. And the phenomenon I'm talking about is many, many nameless characters. There are lots and lots of characters at the end of Sefer Shoftim that have no name. We have a concubine, and we have her father, and we have her Levite husband, and we have his attendants, and we have the Ephraimite host, and we have the people of Giv'ah, and we have the elders of the congregation. We have lots and lots of people who don't have names. What is a society which does not have names? What does this mean? A society without names is, I believe, a society in which people are fundamentally alienated one from the other. A society without names is a society in which people do not see the other. They do not see a person in front of them, a person with identity, with personhood, with a name. We unfortunately know quite well what happens when you take away a person's name and instead you assign them a number. What happens, of course, is that that person is no longer regarded as a person. And when you see in front of you not a subject, not a human subject, but an object, you are able to deny that person their fundamental rights, the right to food, the right to survival, the right to safety, the right to dignity. When you don't see a person in front of you, you don't see someone with those rights, and you can deny them food. Now, of course, we noted before that the book of Shoftim really ends with a Sodom-like story. It is very, very, very reminiscent of the story of Sodom, where again, Lot takes in the 2 angels as guests, and the people of the town surround the house. And, here we have a society where people can sit in the street without being invited in, where kindness, chesed, is discouraged, where the wealthy do not care for the poor, where the one person who invites a stranger in is punished by the townspeople, and where people behave with outright cruelty. Now, this society is deemed so vile, so corrupt by God, that God slates it for utter destruction. Its annihilation is meant to be so complete and so total that it is then sown with salt to symbolize a place that can produce nothing, that has no potential growth because we don't want it to spread anything to the world at large. And as horrifying as this seems, this is exactly where Am Yisrael find themselves at the end of the first period of settlement in the land. This is the first period of settlement in the land, and they find themselves deeply, deeply ensconced in Sodom and Amorah. And of course, what this suggests is that Am Yisrael has no future, that they are slated for destruction, that they have created a society which is not viable, which is not worthy of continuing. And so the book ends. The book of Shoftim ends with a sense of impending doom. This is not a viable society. And the fact that they have abandoned Avram's path of kindness, of compassion, of chesed, means that they have lost the bracha of Avraham. The bracha of Avraham is the bracha of nationhood. It is land and children, Zera ha'adam and Zera ha'adama. And they, in the period of Shoftim, Am Yisrael has lost Birchat Avraham because they have lost the path of Avraham. They have deviated to the path of Lot, to the path of separating from Avraham, of Sodom and Amorah. And therefore, they've lost their future. They've lost the vision of a society that is built on benevolence, that is built on seeing the other. So now, how do we correct this, right? This is a very short description of a rather long book, the book of Judges, which I just sort of, encapsulated in just a few minutes. And now I want to turn our attention to the book of Ruth and ask, how does this short book, just 4 chapters long, manage to extricate us from the terrible social disintegration that I've been describing that characterizes the book of Judges? How does it navigate us from that terrible period to a more promising period of the Davidic dynasty, a period of leadership, a period of stability, and a period of a viable and united society? Well, when we turn to the book of Ruth, oddly, despite my previous description of the book as a tranquil and harmonious pastoral book, when we look a little bit more closely and we look at some of the backdrop characters of the book, the minor characters of the book, we actually see a great deal of Sefer Shoftim. In other words, we see Elimelech and his family going to Moab, even though it seems pretty clear that they have food, right? They have food. They just don't want to share their food. That's what Rashi says in, bringing the Midrash, that all the people surrounded Elimelech's house, Zebikupato, each one's holding a sucker box, and Elimelech sneaks out the back door. Well, that Midrash is based on the fact that if Elimelech and his family went to Moab during the period of the famine, he certainly had food, because, of course, Moab is not a place that gives food, right? They can't even marry into the Jewish people, al divar asher lo kidmu etchem belechem uvemayim b'derech b'tzeitchem Mitzrayim, because they didn't give us food and water when we were coming out of Egypt. That's a pasuk in Devarim, Perek Gimel. So if Elimelech went to Moab during this period, it means he had food, and he's running away because he doesn't want to share his food. Well, the characters that we meet later, it's even more clear that they're Shoftim-like characters. Consider, for example, the women of Beit Lechem at the end of Perek Aleph. When Naomi comes back to Beit Lechem, the women come out and they are shocked to see her. It's been 10 plus years. And what's more, of course, she comes back in an entirely different state than the one that she had left them. She has no husband. She has no children. She has no means. She seems to be in a terrible state of impoverishment. And they turn to her and they say, Hazot Naomi? Is that Naomi? And this, of course, launches Naomi's terrible, embittered speech, where she explains that God has embittered her, has treated her badly. She's come back empty. And at the conclusion of this speech, the women say not one word. So that 2 psukim later, or 3 psukim later, we find Naomi on the verge of starving to death. That's why Ruth has to offer to Naomi to go down to the fields to pick the food, because none of the women in the town have offered any homecoming cakes or any meals or any food whatsoever, even though they are right now harvesting their grain. And so we certainly see here some element of shoftim-like behavior. We're going to see it again. Or I'll say one other thing about the women, and that is that the women are, another thing that I think is rather striking here is that, Naomi's not alone when she comes back to Beit Lechem. She is attended. She's standing next to Ruth, right? So the fact that these women don't see Ruth, completely ignore Ruth, don't even ask about Ruth, that is so classic Sefer Shoftim. They completely ignore Ruth. She has no personhood. They are completely not interested in her. They're not interested in what she's doing there. They don't ask about her. That question is glaringly absent. What they should have asked is, and who is this young lady with you? Now, in general, I think during the course of the story, we find that a lot of the people of Beit Lechem seem to ignore Ruth or seem to not see Ruth. When Boaz turns to the foreman and says, who is that girl? The foreman says, oh, she's that Moabite girl, the one that came back with Naomi, right? He doesn't even bother to ask her name, right? She has no name. She's that Moabite girl, nameless, faceless, anonymous, completely alienated from a society which is very, very characteristically regarding others as aliens, as objects, not as subjects worthy of their attention. Now, a couple more things that indicate the shoftim-like background of Migdal Ruth. First of all, Ploni Almoni, who refuses to take responsibility and marry Ruth, and also the reapers in the field, who in a chilling moment, Boaz turns to Ruth and says, he offers her food, he offers her to pick in his field, and then he says to Ruth, oh, and don't worry, I've commanded the boys not to touch you. Which every time I hear that passage, it's sort of, almost hidden within Boaz's excessively kind words to Ruth. And suddenly, it always makes me suddenly sit up and say, what just happened? Right? Did Boaz just have to command the boys in Beit Lechem not to harass Ruth? I mean, is that not self-evident? So clearly it's not. This, of course, is a period where an entire city can collectively rape a concubine. And so, yes, Boaz has to tell the reapers in the field, Halo tziviti et hane'arim livilti noge'ech. Okay, so the backdrop of Ruth is very much Sefer Shoftim. And therefore, it's no wonder that the problem in Ruth, really the overall problem of Ruth is the problem of names. The goal of Migdal Ruth is lahakim shem hamet al nachalato, to restore the name of the family of Elimelech, which is threatened with extinction because of their behavior. This very much mirrors what is happening in the society of Sefer Shoftim at this time, right? And so, Naomi also says, I've lost my name, right? Al tikrena li Naomi, kirena li Mara, right? Don't call me pleasant, call me bitter, right? And Ploni Almoni loses his name. Of course, Ploni Almoni is another way of saying no name, right? So he loses his name because he has acted like a figure from the period of the judges. And the people in the period of the judges lose their name. And so we're not getting any help here from the backdrop, right? The backdrop of Migdal Ruth is very much the problem of Sefer Shoftim, and yet this book is going to take us to monarchy. It is going to take us to a period in which the nation can rehabilitate and unify. How do we get there? And here's one of the remarkable messages of Migdal Ruth, and that is the power of the individual to change society. Two individuals in this book turn around the trajectory of society, Ruth and Boaz. I think it's an amazing message. That in itself is a worthy and very accessible and very true message, right? Ruth and Boaz really turn the entire period of the Shoftim on its head and move us in a more positive direction. How do they do that? Well, I'm going to briefly touch upon Ruth, and then I want to turn our attention to Boaz. But what I want to say about Ruth is that Ruth comes from Moab, right? Moab, of course, is the spiritual heir of Sodom and Gomorrah. Right? It's also the only thing that emerges from the ashes of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? We talked about this a little bit last week, that Moab emerges from the union between Lot and his daughters, and they actually adopt the approach of Sodom and Amorah. They're the spiritual heirs of Sodom and Amorah, Moab and Ammon. Ruth comes from Moab and moves towards the path of Abraham. She, in fact, makes the opposite movement of the nation during the period of Shoftim. They move from the path of Abraham to Sodom and Amorah, to the path that is the antithesis to the Abraham path. And Ruth, who starts out in Moab, makes the decision that she wants to live her life like the family of Abraham. She becomes the paradigm of loyalty. In contrast to Barak's words, Im telchini v'halachti v'im lo telchini lo elech, Ruth pledges unconditional loyalty to Naomi, Yel asher telchi elech, u'asher talini alin, amech, ami, v'elokayach elokai, v'asher tamuti amut, v'sham akaber. We hear echoes of Barak in Ruth's words, but Ruth says the opposite of Barak. She pledges unconditional loyalty to Naomi. She does constant acts of chesed, and ultimately she becomes the pipeline of food for Naomi. In fact, she is the opposite of Sodom and Amorah. She is very, very clearly on the path of Abraham. In this way, Ruth becomes the role model who can teach the people how to leave the path of Moab, to leave the path of Sodom and Amorah, and come back to the path of Abraham. By the way, I think Boaz recognizes this very explicitly when Ruth is, falls on her face and says to him, "Wow, madua matzati chen beinecha la'akireni v'anochin ochuriah." How did I find favor in your eyes? And he says to her, "Hu gadli kol asher asit et chamotech." It has surely been told to me, I brought it for you here, that which you did with your mother-in-law after your husband died. V'tazvi avich v'imech v'eretz moladtech v'telchi al am asher lo yadat mol shalshom. Right? Boaz says to her, "I heard everything about you." And what is it that he heard about her? He heard these words that echo Abraham's first command from God. This is the way that the Tanakh creates linguistic connections. What Boaz is saying to Ruth is not simply, "I heard all the nice things that you did." What he's saying to her is, "I heard that you acted like Abraham. I heard that you are an Abraham-like figure." And in fact, Ruth becomes the role model to teach the people how to get back to the path of Abraham. Now, I want to turn to Boaz. I don't have much more time. So I want to turn our attention now and see what Boaz's contribution is to this story. Because, Ruth's actions are remarkable. But, she can't really change society at the time, right? She herself is the victim of this society, of, their treatment of her. She's a foreigner. Her origins and her association with Naomi do not particularly endear her to the townspeople. And she, of course, is the victim of their cruelty, of their alienation. She's basically powerless to affect them. But Boaz is a totally different story. Boaz is a respected elder. Boaz is a landed person, right? He has property. Boaz is introduced as a man with a name, right? Don't forget that Boaz actually never leaves Beit Lechem during the Ra'av. We talked about that a little bit last week. Look at Boaz, his introduction here in Perek Daled, Pasuk Aleph, Naomi, Modal Isha, Ish Gibor Chayil, Mimishpachat Elimach, Ushmo, Boaz. This man has a name. He has retained his name even during a time period when everyone is losing their name. Boaz keeps his name. And the reason that he keeps his name, we'll see in a moment, is because he continues to see others. See, I want to say something about Boaz. Boaz does a tremendous amount of chesed for Ruth throughout the course of the book, right? Just endless things. He gives her food for that day, right? He gives her lunch, right? He gives her the rights to pick in his fields for the long term, even instructing his reapers to drop Ruth extra food because, of course, Ruth's not accustomed to being in the field, and I'm sure that there are a lot of reapers jockeying for position. And Boaz says to his reapers, drop her extra food so she gets enough food. Boaz also protects her from harassment, as we said before, but he also protects her dignity. Right? Boaz is not just concerned about her physical well-being, he's also concerned about her psychological well-being. He says to the boys, V'lo tigaruba, v'lo tachlimuha, don't embarrass her, don't shout at her, right? He's really ensuring that Ruth has a decent experience. And of course, when he meets her on the threshing floor, as we saw last week, he promises to ensure her future. And he promises that either the Goel or he will marry her, and ultimately, of course, he marries her. So Boaz does, endless kindness for Ruth. But what I'm more interested in is not the actual kindness that Boaz does, but what enables that kindness? In other words, he's living in such a corrupt society. How does Boaz manage to hold on to his, not just decency, but his exceptional virtue? And we noted before that I think that the real problem of the period of the Judges is the lack of seeing the other. Well, let's just look at Boaz. What is Boaz's first act when he first comes to his field? First, he greets the reapers, which itself is striking, and then he turns to the foreman, and he says the following words, Lemi hane'ara hazot. To whom does this girl belong? And the Gemara in Shabbat, and Daf Kuf Yud Gimel, asks the question, is that Boaz's way? He asks after the girls. It's rather strange. He comes to his field. Oh, who's that girl? Who's that girl? Right? The Gemara is a little bit troubled by this. So the Gemara answers the way the Gemara answers. He saw that she was very wise. He saw that she was very modest. But I want to twist the question a little bit. I don't want to ask, why does Boaz ask that question? I want to ask, why does nobody else ask that question? See, in fact, that's exactly the question that the women of the town were missing, that they omitted. Look at what they should have said. Hazot Naomi, ulemi hane'ara hazot, right? What they should have said was, is this Naomi? And who's this girl, right? And they don't. In fact, it is only Boaz that asks the appropriate question at this time, the question that gives Ruth a sense of personhood, a sense of recognition. It takes a Boaz who has a name to recognize Ruth. And both Ruth and Naomi recognize that there's something extraordinary in Boaz's seemingly ordinary behavior. After Boaz's kindness, Ruth turns to him and she says to him, she falls on her face and she says, Madua matzati chen be'enecha lehakireni ve'anochi nochriya. Right? She says, how have I found favor in your eyes to recognize me? And I am but a stranger. You see that word lahakireni? I can't believe you saw me, she says. Now, Naomi says the same thing. When Ruth returns to Naomi at the end of the day in the field and she has an armful of grain, Naomi says, where were you today? Yehi makirech baruch. Let the one who recognized you be blessed. In other words, this is not a period in which recognition comes easily. People don't see each other. They don't recognize the fundamental needs of the other. And I want to turn our attention, for those of you who are with us last week, I want to turn back to the parak that we were talking about last week, and exactly that moment that we talked about last week. And I want to show it to you from a little bit of a different angle. And that is that, of course, parak Gimel is the parak in which Naomi sends Ruth down to the threshing floor, to lie at Boaz's feet and wait for him to tell her what to do. And I think that this moment contains the most striking indication of Boaz's character, and also the moment that really Boaz begins to turn around the trajectory of the narrative and of the period of Sefer Shoftim. Now, of course, this Chazal recognized this as a potential seduction scene, and I think that that's very well indicated by Pasuk Chet, Vahi b'chatzi halayla. It was at the midpoint of the night. Vayecherad ha'ish vayilafet v'hinei isha shochevet margalotav. What I want you to note in that pasuk is, at the midpoint of the night, the man wakes up and there's a woman lying at his feet. This verse has no names. There is no Ruth and there is no Boaz. There is just a man and a woman, nameless genders, a situation in which Boaz can easily take advantage of Ruth as the object of his desire, that is, if he sees her as an object. But he does not. In this transformative moment, and I'm going to point to the same moment we talked about last week, but I'm going to say something a little bit different about it. At this heightened moment, Boaz turns to her with a question. Mi at, who are you? And in doing so, it's not just that he shows that he doesn't want to be deceived, like we said last week. It's that he gives Ruth the opportunity to state her name. Boaz recognizes that everybody has the right to a name, to recognition. And instead of regarding her simply as a gender, as a nameless gender, Boaz turns Ruth from an object to a subject. He gives her the opportunity to say, Anochi Ruth. He recognizes her as a person with rights, with dignity, with personhood. And it is this moment, I think, that Boaz really begins to transform society. Boaz understands the importance of the name. And when we turn to Ruth Perek Daled, we see that Boaz restores the name of Elimelech's family. He does this by buying the land. He does this by marrying Naomi. And he does this by, at the moment of the sale, he mentions all of the dead people by name. He calls Ruth Eshet Machlon, and he describes Elimelech and Chilion and Machlon, and he mentions all of their names in Perek Daled, Pasuk Tet. In fact, Perek Daled is the chapter of names. The word shame is one of the key words of the chapter. It appears 7 times in this final chapter of Megillat Ruth. It is Boaz that restores the names of the family. And of course, the book ends with 10 generations linked by names. The Eile Toldot Paretz, Peretz holidet Chetron, the Chetron holidet Ram, the Ram holidet Aminadav, the Aminadav holidet Nachshon, etc., etc. These names link us to the past and link us to the future and restore a sense of a viable society. Megillat Ruth ends with the recognition of names. And Boaz, I think in doing this, does not simply restore the names of the family. He also begins the transformation of the period of the judges, paving the path towards the kingship, a society of names, a society in which human beings properly see one another and therefore exhibit loyalty and commitment and compassion and take upon themselves the assumption of social responsibility, and it becomes a society of chesed. So I will take this opportunity. I spoke very quickly. I hope that you were able to follow me. I'll take this opportunity to wish everybody a Chag Sameach, and Be'ezrat Hashem, we should continue learning Torah perhaps next time in person, but still this is a wonderful opportunity to meet together on Zoom for the purpose of preparing for Shavuot and learning Torah together. So I wish you a Chag Matan Torah Sameach.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ziegler. I appreciate it. And 1 second. Before we transition to the next shiur with our Mashgicha Ruchanit, Mrs. Shana Goldberg, who's going to speak on Shavuot, a genuine human holiday, Rabbanit Esti Rosenberg just wants to say a quick word of thanks. So I'm going to unmute her, and then we will begin with Mashgicha Ruchanit Shana Goldberg in 5 minutes.
Okay, so I just had an opportunity to see everybody while I was listening to Yael's beautiful shiur, and there's so many names here of students and parents and supporters and alumni that I was really very, very, very moved. I really feel even now more far away that I can't just say hello and how are you and say thank you and appreciate you. It really filled me in a lot of love to the Migdalos community. I really just want to thank everybody again and say how much we miss our students from this year, our alumni and our Migdalos community, and thank you all. Chag Sameach.
Thank you very much.